Morris says he produced the documentary to fill in the gaps of Cuban history, which he subtitles A Story of Sugar.
Slaves worked it. Europeans consumed it, traded it, and dreamt about it. And nations went to war over it. Sugar was the petroleum of its time.
Cuba's supply of the world's sugar has declined to just 10%, but at one time the island supplied up to 40% of the world's supply. Sugar plantation owners grew wealthy off the backs of slave labor, working sugar cane fields and processing sugar. Using lithographs and paintings, Morris's story of sugar begins with Christopher Columbus's discovery of Cuba in October of 1492.
According to legend, on a subsequent voyage from the Canary Islands, Columbus received a parting gift of several sugarcane plants.
Morris notes that while sugar was available in Europe at the time, it was exotic and expensive because it had to be transported in caravans from India.
As the story goes, Columbus planted a few young plants on Hispaniola, a large island to the east of Cuba. The combination of sun, rain, and fertile soil were perfect, and the plants thrived.
It wasn't long before Spaniards and other Europeans were migrating to Cuba and Hispaniola to become sugar farmers. It required heavy labor.
When the Taínos resisted, the Spanish forces came down heavily, first on Hispaniola, then on Cuba. With few exceptions, the conquering Spaniards viewed resistance to their authority as treachery.
Lost to slaughter and disease, natives dwindled in numbers. The Spanish turned to African slave labor.
By 1505, just 13 years after Columbus's first voyage, the first shipments of African slaves arrived in Hispaniola for the primary purpose of working the sugarcane.
Morris explains that the work of African plantation slavery was backbreaking. Planting and cultivating resulted in heat exhaustion and heart attack. Boiling and refining sugar in intense heat was equally labor-intensive. The story of Cuba is also one of warring kingdoms and colonies. In 1762, Britain lusted for the rich territory.
12 British ships laid siege to Havana on June 22nd of that year, cutting off the harbor and pelting the city with cannon fire. Within 2 months, the city was in British hands.
In a peace treaty, Britain returned Havana to Spain, but in exchange acquired Florida.
Over the next several centuries, the lure of sugar and rum would keep the European powers busy attacking, capturing, and recapturing the islands of the Caribbean. Nearly all the islands would change hands by military force at least once.